Picture this. June 4th, 1943. A train screeches to a halt in Mexia, Texas. Doors slide open. Imagine the faces of 1,850 battle-hardened German soldiers stepping onto American soil for the first time, expecting a collapsed, defeated nation. Instead, they got something far more devastating than any bomb: the truth. What happened next would become history's most effective ideological weapon, not through violence or propaganda, but through something far more powerful: letting enemies see your abundance. Unteroffizier Werner Burkhardt couldn't believe his eyes. His pencil shook as he wrote hidden words in his journal that night, words that could have earned him a death sentence if discovered. The Americans are lying to us. No nation could possibly maintain such wealth while fighting a war on two fronts. But they weren't lying. From the train window, electric lights exploded across the Texas landscape at 10 p.m. Street lights, farmhouse lights, shop windows blazing with electricity as far as the eye could reach. Back home in Germany, blackout orders had plunged entire cities into darkness for 3 years. Before the war, barely 20% of German farms even had electricity. Yet here, in what Nazi propaganda had mocked as a decayed, collapsing America, light poured from every direction like water from a broken dam. These 1,850 men had no idea they were about to witness the psychological demolition of everything their government had taught them. The mathematics of Allied victory weren't being calculated in battle plans, they were being written in production numbers that would soon shatter every assumption these soldiers carried about their enemies, their nation, and their very cause. The collapse began weeks earlier, on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General Jürgen von Arnim laid down his weapons. With him came approximately 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian soldiers, the Afrika Korps' surviving remnants. These weren't conscripts or green recruits. These were desert veterans, men who'd driven the British back to the gates of Egypt, soldiers who'd earned even Montgomery's grudging respect. And now they were prisoners. Among them was Feldwebel Friedrich Rauke, decorated with the Iron Cross First Class, veteran of the French campaign, wounded twice in the African theater. His diary, discovered decades later in the National Archives, would provide historians with the most visceral, detailed account of how Nazi captivity systematically destroyed Nazi ideology from the inside.
The transformation began in Oran, Algeria. As Rauke and 30,000 other prisoners waited in hastily constructed camps for transport ships, they encountered their first glimpse of American organizational capacity. The U.S. Army processed thousands of captives daily with a mechanical precision that exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had achieved even during its glory years. Identity cards photographed, medical examinations completed, inoculations administered, Geneva Convention rights explained in fluent German by American officers trained specifically for this purpose. But the real shock came with food. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, described it in a letter to his mother 8 months later. His words were stark. In the processing cage at Oran, the Americans fed us better than we'd eaten during 6 months of desert combat. White bread, real coffee, meat twice daily. We assumed it was theater, propaganda meant to impress us. We didn't yet understand. This was just their standard military ration. Standard. The ships themselves, those Liberty vessels carrying them across the Atlantic, became floating monuments to American industrial obsession. The SS Robert E. Pierce had been constructed in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes at Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, California. 3 of these massive cargo vessels rolled off the production lines every single day at peak output. These weren't one-off marvels. These were mass production's ultimate expression. The 2-week Atlantic crossing in July 1943 delivered the second phase of ideological collapse. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann from the 90th Light Division kept meticulous records in letters that survived the war and repatriation. The ship's crew, he observed, discarded daily garbage that exceeded the weekly rations his entire combat company had received during their final African months. Untouched steaks, whole loaves, milk cartons thrown overboard after sitting too long. They did this casually, without ceremony, not to mock us, but because to them this surplus was meaningless. Their supply was infinite. Prisoners talked with talkative American sailors who explained the scale with casual indifference. The vessel transporting them was one of 2,710 Liberty ships that would be constructed during the war. Each required 250,000 individual parts sourced from factories spread across 32 states. The engines alone, 900 horsepower cylinders manufactured in 3 separate facilities, then assembled in ports that hadn't existed 2 years prior. Oberleutnant Colonel Wilhelm von Steuben, whose Prussian aristocratic lineage traced back through every major German military conflict since Frederick the Great, would later document his observations in post-war memoirs. As our transport approached the American coastline, I watched the radar antenna rotating above the bridge. The sophistication was undeniable.
The journey inland became an expedition into systematic myth-busting. Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist from IG Farben, recognized the implications instantly during post-war interviews. I knew those installations. I could identify the distillation columns, the catalytic crackers. Each facility surpassed anything we'd constructed, and this represented only 4 locations in one region. They informed us dozens more existed across the country. The trains rumbled past Ford's Willow Run facility near Detroit, visible from miles away. This single complex, erected in merely 9 months, manufactured a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. During peak production, 42,000 workers orchestrated the assembly of bombers using 1,500,000 separate components sourced from 1,500 subcontractors. The facility consumed 2.5 million square feet of floor space and demanded more electricity than the entire German city of Cologne. Hauptmann Very, a Luftwaffe pilot shot down over Tunisia, pressed his face against the window as the transport passed. He counted 17 B-24s in various assembly phases, visible from a single vantage point. We'd been told American aircraft were inferior, hastily constructed, designed to disintegrate in combat, but I could observe the assembly line precision, the construction quality. These weren't inferior machines, they were simply manufactured faster than we thought possible. The deeper eastward the trains ventured, the more thorough became the destruction of Nazi mythology. In St. Louis, the transport crossed the Mississippi River via the Eads Bridge. Below them, barges transported grain quantities exceeding the entire German harvest of 1942. Grain elevators stretched along both riverbanks, each structure capable of holding enough wheat to sustain a German metropolis for months. Unterofficer Karl Schmidt, a Bavarian farmer's son, documented his observations. The Americans transport foodstuffs as we transport ammunition in endless quantities with indifference to waste. I observed workers loading a barge with sufficient wheat to provision my entire hometown for 5 consecutive years. The crane operator consumed a sandwich containing meat thicker than our allocated weekly ration. Kansas City revealed yet another level. The train stopped at an enormous stockyard where tens of thousands of cattle waited processing. The aroma of meatpacking facilities saturated the air across multiple miles. German prisoners who'd subsisted on 200 grams of meat weekly in Africa, when fortunate, watched American laborers consuming beef sandwiches during lunch breaks. Gefreiter Paul Fischer captured the moment. They consumed meat as casually as we consumed bread. No, that's imprecise. They consumed meat as we desperately wished we could consume bread.
A guard purchased hamburgers from a local vendor, meat, cheese, vegetables on white bread for 15 cents each. He bought 20 without hesitation and paid with a single-dollar bill. This transaction wasn't exceptional. This represented their ordinary food.
Camp Hearn, Texas, constructed in merely 4 months, housed between 3,000 and 4,800 captives under conditions exceeding what most had experienced as civilians. Wooden barracks featured electric illumination, flush sanitation facilities, hot showers, and steam-based heating systems. The lumber used in single structures exceeded what entire German communities possessed collectively. The camp hospital shattered all preconceptions. Oberst Dr. Friedrich Bauer, chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, discovered himself operating within a facility surpassing most German civilian medical institutions. X-ray apparatus, surgical instrumentation, pharmaceutical supplies absent from German distribution since 1941. Everything provided as standard protocol for enemy detainees. Penicillin, he would later testify. This miraculous compound we'd only heard whispers about. They dispensed it casually, even for trivial infections among prisoners. German soldiers perished from insufficient sulfur-based medications, while Americans administered their most revolutionary medicine without hesitation to their captives. The kitchen compound expanded consciousness further. Prisoners assigned to food service discovered walk-in refrigeration, motorized mixers, automatic dishwashing apparatus, and gas ranges calibrated for 5,000-person meal preparation. Daily rations included fresh dairy, eggs, meat, produce, and white bread, quantities German civilians hadn't witnessed since 1939. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, formerly a Munich hotel chef, documented the reality. Today, we discarded surplus exceeding what my family consumed across 3 years. Not spoiled provisions, simply excess. American military protocols mandate 10% overcapacity to guarantee complete rations. The remainder gets destroyed. I wept disposing of perfectly serviceable bread into refuse bins.
By September 1943, American agricultural labor shortages necessitated employing prisoners across fields and manufacturing facilities nationwide. This pragmatic decision, driven purely by production necessity, would prove more devastating to Nazi ideology than any government propaganda initiative. Groups of captives were transported daily to work locations, traveling through American heartland without blindfolds or restricted routes. They observed everything. Endless corn and wheat fields, factories operating triple-shift schedules, retail establishments overflowing with merchandise, parking lots saturated with automobiles, residential properties equipped with refrigerators and radios. The systematic, undeniable evidence of mass prosperity that contradicted 3 decades of Nazi teachings about American decline and decay. This wasn't indoctrination, this was tourism through the truth. The soldiers couldn't argue with what their eyes witnessed. They couldn't dismiss factory production as propaganda. They couldn't rationalize grain surpluses as exaggeration. The evidence was concrete, visible, and absolutely overwhelming. By war's end, approximately 375,000 German and Italian prisoners had circulated through American camps. When repatriated in 1946 to 1947, they carried something far more powerful than military intelligence. They carried witness testimony to a civilization capable of prosperity while simultaneously waging global warfare. A civilization their government had systematically misrepresented. The propaganda defeat was complete, not through counterarguments or debunking, but through the silent, irrefutable language of abundance itself.